Hi, I'm Andrew Goodwin, coming to you with episode 1 of AGD's Business Basics. And what better to cover than the difference between an architect and a designer, because it's probably one of the number one questions we get from new clients, basically asking what's the difference between you as an architect and other home designers or interior designers? Why should we choose you? So let's start with the two different people in this scenario, the architect and the designer. And in this case, I will call them a home designer. The architect is somebody that is a licensed professional. Architect, coming from the Greek words architekton, basically means chief builder. If we think about that, that means the architect, especially in today's society, is trained and has a lot of experience both from an educational and academic standpoint and a professional standpoint. So they're a trained professional. They're a licensed, trained professional. A designer, in this case, the home designer, could be somebody that has a lot of experience, maybe decades of experience in a specific area of expertise. And in this case, a home, right? Designing a home. That home designer could be just as good as an architect, but the difference here is really threefold. So let me dispel these three different issues that we see. And they really come down to what they can do, why they can do it, and how they've learned to do it. So let's think about what they can do. The architect versus the designer basically means that the designer can prepare building permits for a very specific number of building types. The architect can prepare building permits or construction drawings for many different project types. In the state of California, if we look at the legal aspects of the architect versus the designer and getting a building permit, the designer can only provide drawings for single-family residences, and usually single-family residences under 3 stories, multi-family residences of 4 units or less and under 2 stories, 2 stories or under, and ag buildings or garage buildings, workshop buildings, those that have less of a significant safety issue. The architect can do not only single family, not only multifamily, but they can also do commercial, and they have to do commercial for accessibility reasons, ADA accessibility reasons, institutional, university type buildings. Those have to be stamped by a licensed architect. So that's the difference of what they can do. Now, the reasoning behind why they can do that is because in the state of California and in most of our states in the United States, the architect is a licensed professional that basically is held responsible for their actions. They are legally held responsible. When you sit for your exams and you become that licensed architect, you have a legal responsibility to your client to provide a service to the best of your ability, the same as every other architect would do that. And you're legally bound by the stamp that you put on that project. The designer is not. The designer does not have any legal responsibility other than what might be in their contract with the person to uphold any kind of standard. So that is the reason why the architect is mainly different in our states and in our legal society. And the last thing is really how they've learned to do this. The architect not only has to go through 5 to 6 years of university training at an accredited university providing architectural training. They then have to go through 2 to 3 years of job experience training. This is sometimes through an architectural internship or a construction internship. But then on top of that, and this is now we're 8 years down the road, they have to sit and pass 6 to 7 exams, both national, there's about 6 exams nationally, and then a state exam for most states. That sometimes takes multiple years to pass, and they are very convoluted. I highly recommend, if you're looking to license, check out Young Architects and Young Architect Forum. Michael over there is doing a great job at educating how to pass these exams. And then once you're past all these exams, you have your stamp, you're able to put a stamp on those drawings. you have to provide continuing education every year to show that you are current with the current codes. Every 3 years, the building permits, building codes in the state of California change. So in order to stay current, the state has you go through continuing education. Those that have an AIA after their name, that have sat and decided to become members of the American Institute of Architects, have even more continuing education. It's almost sometimes threefold, fourfold more education hours than what is required in the state level just to be a registered architect. So the architect versus the designer might have, dozens and decades of experience in that home design and that specific genre, but they may not have that quality of education and that background. So that's the main difference of how they've learned to get there. Now, this is to say that both have their own right and have their own abilities. I have seen architects that are not that great. I've seen home designers that are not that great. It really depends on how you as a client are willing to spend your money and your liability on your project. Again, look into what they've done, what their portfolio shows, their reviews from the previous clients, the previous projects. See how the building is working out. If they have a leaning towards sustainability and doing things for the environment, great. Take a look at that and adapt that as part of the principles of why you're hiring them. But make sure that you understand the basics of your legal responsibilities. Too often do I have a client that comes to me and says, I didn't know that my coffee shop needed to have a permit, and then I hired this guy to do my interior design and he can't stamp the permit, so I've lost $5,000. That's a big issue. That's a real big issue in our industry. Similarly, if you have a business that's in California and you want to do something in Nevada, you have to understand that as soon as you cross the lines in Nevada, you need to have a stamp to even talk about architecture. So let's be very, very clear that it's important that you educate yourself before you start this journey. What you're spending your money on is very, very important. And in some cases, especially between architect and home designer, that client is spending the biggest purchase, sometimes $1 million on their home, especially in California, on their home. It's the biggest purchase they've ever had. So take the time and understand why you might go with one versus the other. So again, this is AGD's Business Basics, episode 1 on the difference between an architect and a designer. Thank you.